Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me along.
Tim, you've travelled the continent over a period of time and written about it extensively. What are some of the changes that you've seen over the past 20 years?
The changes have to be that the voices of the people are being heard. We're getting much more accountability with governments and leaders. Elites that were so aloof in the 80s and 60s, 70s and 80s that were just totally disregarded. So elections are now installed. But does that follow that sort of everything is great and everything is rosy in this garden? Not a bit of it. We've seen that in all over the continent, where sometimes there's been an election and yet there's still trouble. So I'm intrigued. I'm challenged by the history of it, really.
Let's go back on the history. So it was, I think, 2000 that The Economist had that dreadful headline on their cover, that Africa, the forgotten, the doomed continent.
The failed continent.
The failed continent.
The failed continent.
And fast forward 13 years later, there's optimism and renewed hope. What do you think was a turning point?
There were moments of people power. I mean, there was actually a very interesting moment in October 2000 in Ivory Coast. Remember, people power on the streets had been going on in Europe at the end of the Cold War. You had those great public revolutions. Yet in Africa, that hadn't happened, really. I mean, there were moments through in the 50s and 60s that flickered up, but they were brutally put down. But in October of 2000, I remember very well, in the Ivory Coast in Abidjan, we had a moment there. So I think that's the change. But I would also challenge that everything is, yes, The Economist was crass in saying the failed continent. They have to remember I come as a background as a journalist, so sometimes we're guilty of generalizations. But just to say that today growth is so strong in Africa, everything is sweet, I think that's wrong. I think we have to be aware of that. And you, as someone who represents a business school, and your students and your consumers of this channel, they know very well that statistics alone don't tell the whole picture. So that there is growth in Nigeria, for example, doesn't tell us about the 70% of the population who live on $2 a day, who are being forgotten.
But we do see the more classic economic approach of looking for economic growth in the numbers. How does one marry the two?
Let me just mention Nigeria. We're in a country, we're talking South Africa. South Africa has a population, crudely speaking, a third of Nigeria's, and it has electricity capacity of 40 gigs here, 40 gigs. In Nigeria, there's an indigenous, local, domestic power capacity of 4 gigs. So it's got 3 times the population and 1/10 the power. 1/10. How can you grow an economy without the lights on? So in Nigeria, every house has a diesel generator, and all of the complications that are involved with that. Fuel, breaking down components, the inefficiencies. But what I find is if you go on a journey, actually experience some of the more awkward, off-piste places in Africa, you get a much greater feel for the realities of business potential, or what you'd get on your return of investment. And that's what excites me, thrills me. Actually go to the place, smell the air, drink the water, do what everyone there does, what the locals do. And that will tell you more than an Economist Intelligence Unit appraisal of Ghana, say, or telecoms in Central Africa.
Just want to touch on another part of your work has been around gender equality. And if you can just give us your reflections over the past couple of years on the change in gender equality on the continent.
Well, isn't it fantastic where we have heads of state in this continent who are showing a clean pair of heels to the rest of the world because they are women, for example, in Liberia. And in Johnson Sirleaf, it's a country I know very well. And this is a country that was run by a warlord. Let's remember, let's not mince with our words here. Charles Taylor, a warlord, convicted of war crimes, not interestingly in Liberia, but in neighbouring Sierra Leone. And now we have that country run by a woman who is representative, and she's not, as an individual, she's obviously very special in her own qualities, but she's representative of a vast community cohort whose voices have occasionally been ignored. I remember during the war in Liberia getting to Monrovia and seeing the women campaigning for peace. And they were standing outside a fish market in Monrovia, a broken, destroyed, war-torn building, standing in the rains. It was the rainy season of 2003. And these women were at the leading edge of change. You talked about people power. Well, this was women's power. FGM, female genital mutilation, a subject which comes up in Europe from time to time. That I also am intrigued by in terms of the role it plays in certain cultural traditions, in certain taboos, in certain anchors on a society that, as an outsider, I struggle to understand sometimes. But that again is changing, and you get an enormous number of people in West Africa or in Northeast Africa who are challenging that dominance.
Can you tell us just briefly your summation of your learnings on your travels on the continent?
Well, I've written 2 books about these trips I've made, major trips, and one was through the Congo, that book is called Blood River, and one was in West Africa through Sierra Leone and Liberia, and that's called Chasing the Devil. And in essence, they're both exercises in taking a journey and using that journey to unravel the history. I mean, in the Congo is, frankly, it's the history of Africa writ large in one country. This vast, amazing, teeming environment across the equator with this stunning river, this river that's like a force of nature. All of the potential there, whether it's in the diamonds or the gold or the copper or the coltan or in the agriculture or in the hydro, whatever it is, it's all there. And yet it's been so troubled, so turbulent, so problematic, with the history from the 1960s, the Katanga War, with the Mobutu's rise, the kleptomania, the corruption, and the wars, of course, the worst war in the world, which has been ravaging that region since 1990-96. So I did a journey that unraveled history, and that's what I get thrilled by. And similarly in Sierra Leone and Liberia, places that were torn by conflict, you can see the flickers of hope. You can see those first tendrils growing up if you go on a journey and you engage with those women, the women who hold the sharp end of the machete or the panga, the children who are dreaming about not killing and not being a child soldier, but dreaming about cell phones and cars and looking across the horizon for the future. And that's what excites me, seeing those journeys as a way to unravel complicated places.
And what are the lessons for the future generations to avoid those travesties again?
Accountability and rule of law. Hold those to account. As Madiba himself, Nelson Mandela, said, when you've done the election, your job is only half done. You have to hold those you have elected to account. And in the past, of course, those leaders, those elites have been totally aloof in Africa, whether it was Idi Amin and his successors, or Mobutu Sese Seko, or Charles Taylor, or Bokassa, or it goes on and on. They've always been aloof from their reality. The lesson for me is the people have to hold them to account. And it might be a middle class, a growing middle class. That's what held Europe together. My country, Britain, its glue is its middle class.
On that note, Tim, thank you so much for your time, and we wish you all the best in your endeavours.
Thank you.